Hi guys, welcome back to Pro Studio Live and welcome to the Pro Tools Authority class. Last week we finished covering the different tools and edit modes in Pro Tools. We also covered the rulers and timescales in more depth and went over the MIDI controls section and the session parameters in more detail. Today we will cover creating, deleting, and using tracks, and we will cover all the different track options that you have. We will also cover your cursors and playback options, and we will show you how to save and recall sessions properly. We might even get into some of the stuff you need to know before recording and how to record. So let's start with adding tracks to your session. We already have a session open, but if you're starting with a blank session, then the next logical step is to create a track. This is because Pro Tools needs a track in order to record or edit audio, automation data, or MIDI. Audio and MIDI data are placed on tracks in the form of clips. So in order to create a track, you need to use the New Tracks dialog box, which can be accessed by going to the track menu at the top of your session and then selecting New. So I'll just show you guys that really quickly. So we're going to go to the track option up here, and we're just going to select New, and it's that easy. You can also open up this dialog box by holding Command, Shift, and then pressing the N key on your keyboard. And if you're on a Windows machine, that's going to be Control, Shift, N. So I'll just show you guys that really quickly as well. So I'm just going to cancel out of this. I'm going to do Command, Shift, N, and it opens up that New Track dialog box. So once you have the dialog box open, you will be prompted to enter the number of tracks, the track format, which is mono or stereo, the track type, which dictates whether it's an audio track, a MIDI track, and so on, and the time base of the track, which has options like samples or ticks. While in the New Tracks dialog box, you can either use your mouse to select your options, or you can use shortcuts. So you can hold Command on a Mac or Control on a Windows machine, and then use the up and down arrows to cycle between the track types. So I can just show you guys that really quickly. So I'm going to hold Command and hit those arrow keys, and you can see the different track types cycle through. So where it says audio track right now, that's what you're looking at for track type. So all these different options will cycle through. Okay. You can also hold Command on a Mac or Control on Windows and then use the left and right arrows to cycle between track format options. So I'll just show you that really quick. So I'm holding Command and I'm just hitting the left and right arrows, and you can see those change. So mono or stereo, right? Okay. You can also hold Command on a Mac or Control on Windows and hold the Option key or Alt on Windows, and then use the up and down arrows to change the time base of the track. Okay, so I can just show you that really quick. So I'm going to do Command, Option, and then I'm going to hit those up and down arrows to change it to samples or ticks. All right. You can also add rows to the dialog box. So this is good for example, if you want to create two different types of tracks, like a few audio tracks plus some MIDI tracks. To add a row, you can either use your mouse to press the plus button towards the right of the dialog, which I can just show you really quickly here. It's this plus button right here. And if I hit it, it opens up a new row here for me to choose the options. Or you can hold Command or Control on Windows while holding Shift and press the up and down arrows to add and remove rows. The down arrow will add a row and the up arrow removes the bottom row. Okay, so I'm just going to do that really quickly. Hold Command and Shift and press those up and down arrows. So Command, Shift, and then up and down. And see how I'm adding rows here? And then up removes those rows. So it's pretty easy. So similarly, you can just click on the button with the negative or minus symbol to remove a row once you have more than one row up there, right? I mean, it's pretty obvious, but I'll show you guys really quickly. So here's that negative symbol, the minus symbol, and if I hit that, it just removes that row. I can hit this one to remove this row. That's how it works. So if you open up multiple rows, you should know that the tracks will appear in your session in the same order that they appear in the New Track dialog box. You can also rearrange the order of these track configurations by clicking and dragging on the Move Row control to the right of the dialog box. So I'll show you that really quickly. So that's just these little arrow things right here. So I'm just going to change this track to a MIDI track just so we can see the movement that happens. So I'm going to click that and drag it, and it moves up to the top. So that now it'll be the first track that I create, or I could drag it down to the bottom. I can drag these around it. It's really easy to move them around. So this will rearrange their order when they populate in your actual session. So let's look at those parameters in the new track dialog in a bit more detail. The track number tells us how many of that row's track type you would like to add to your session. Now, the track format parameter gives you options like mono or stereo or other multi-channel formats. What formats are offered depends on the type of system you're on and the type of track you're adding. So if you select to work with a stereo track, you should know that the two channels are automatically linked for clip renaming, editing, and mixing functions. And you don't have to have separate control over each of these two channels. Okay, let's move on to track types. You can select any combo of the Pro Tools supported track types through the new tracks dialog box. So you have a bunch of options, which include audio tracks, MIDI tracks, instrument tracks, auxiliary input tracks, which are also called aux tracks, right? And VCA master tracks, which are only in HD systems. And then you also have master fader tracks. So I can just show you that really quickly. So if we click here, we can see all those options. And that's where they live. So sometimes video tracks is an option here too, as well. But it's good to note that you can only do one video track per session if you're not in a Pro Tools HD system. Therefore, video tracks won't be an option in the new track dialog box if you're just using standard Pro Tools software, since Pro Tools will just create that one track when you import your video later. So let's look at those track type options a bit closer. First of all, audio tracks. So when you import or record and then edit an audio signal as a waveform, you do so using an audio track. Audio tracks can be in any number of supported channels. So they can be in mono and stereo or in any other supported multi-channel format. If you're running HD Pro Tools software, then you can have up to 768 audio tracks and a voice count that depends on your hardware. But if you're running standard Pro Tools software, you can have up to 128 audio tracks with up to 96 voice tracks. It's important to note here that various factors will control how many tracks you can in reality play back and record at the same time. So these factors will include the number of voices your hardware supports, your sampling rate, and the continuity of your audio. Also, your computer will determine how many tracks and how much plug-in processing power you are actually capable of. So if your computer has more faster processors with larger processor counts and faster clock speeds, then you will be able to run more tracks and plugins. So let's move on to the MIDI tracks option. MIDI tracks exist to store MIDI controller and note data, which is something we've talked about a little bit before. You can record or import and edit MIDI data in Pro Tools because Pro Tools has an integrated MIDI sequencer. So this means that you can edit and work with MIDI data in a lot of the same ways that you can work with audio. The MIDI tracks and data shows up in the edit window alongside audio data on the same timeline. So if you go to create a new MIDI track, you'll probably notice that you don't have to select mono or stereo for these tracks. So if you look at my new track dialog box here, you can see that my MIDI track doesn't have that option of mono or stereo. So this is because they're only data. They're data only tracks, right? So there's no need. So since they are closely related to MIDI tracks, let's talk about instrument tracks next. Instrument tracks basically combine a MIDI track with an aux track. This makes it easier to work with all of your MIDI devices and virtual instruments. With an instrument track, you can simply record the MIDI data to the track and then simultaneously apply an instrument plugin to the same track. It saves you the time of creating a MIDI track and an aux track to perform the same or a similar function. Okay, so let's discuss the video tracks option next. With a standard Pro Tools system, you can only create one video track and import one video clip onto that track. This makes standard Pro Tools friendly for post-production purposes, but it means you can't really do any sort of video editing in Pro Tools. So just make sure that any video is done and rendered into one video file before importing it and putting any sound design alongside it. Now, with Pro Tools HD software, you can create multiple video tracks and place multiple video clips on those tracks, but only one video track can actually be online, which means active at any given time. Anyway, regardless of whether it's a standard or HD system, the video track will display the video clip on the timeline, parallel to any clips on any audio, MIDI, or instrument track. Okay, so auxiliary tracks are another track type option. They can be in mono or in stereo, or any other multi-channel format that is supported on your specific system. They're basically a point of control for audio routing tasks. So you can't put any audio clips on aux tracks specifically, but you can use them as an effects return or as an input for monitoring and or processing live audio, or as a submix destination. I use them a lot for submixes and for effects techniques like parallel compression. So another option that's used a lot less in the recording world and is only available on HD software is that of VCA master tracks. The abbreviation VCA stands for Voltage Controlled Amplifier, and the VCA master tracks in Pro Tools were built to emulate the voltage controlled amplifier channels that you would see in analog consoles back in the day. So VCA channel faders on the old analog consoles were used to group, control, or offset signal levels of other channels or groups of channels on the console. So Pro Tools adapted this for their software by making it so that each VCA master track is associated with just one mix group. And so you can control the mix group and its tracks through this VCA master fader. I've seen these a lot when doing live sound work, but you don't see them much being used in the recording studio so much anymore. But they're there if you want to use them, and they can be useful. So let's finally discuss the master fader. Your master fader is sometimes called your master track, and you can create a mono master fader, a stereo master fader, or you can create a master fader in any multi-channel format that is supported on your Pro Tools system. So the master fader is used to control hardware and output levels and bus paths, and you often see it used as the one track that's used to monitor and tweak the levels of the entire session before it leaves the system. Through the master fader, you can control the overall level for all the tracks that are being routed through the main output paths or buses. Now, let's go back to that new track dialog. So the track time base dictates the type of time scale that's associated with the clips or material that you put on the track. Any of your track types can be set to either a sample-based or tick-based timeline. And even though you select the time base of the track when you create it, you can change the time base later if you want to, which is something we'll cover in the future. Sample-based tracks use your audio samples as the time scale, and tick-based tracks will use bars and beats as the time scale. So sample-based tracks are on an absolute time scale. So even if the meter or tempo of the song changes throughout your session, the material on these tracks won't move. They stay in an absolute location that is correlated with a specific sample along the timeline. So audio tracks are sample based by default. However, MIDI and instrument tracks are not. They're tick-based by default. So this means that the content on these tracks are attached to a specific bar and beat location along the timeline. If you change the meter or tempo, then the location of this content will actually shift based on your meter or tempo change. There's actually a cool trick that you can do to get audio, which is normally sample-based, right? To automatically follow any changes that you make in tempo or meter. So if you put your audio into elastic audio mode and you elastic audio enable the track, which is something we'll cover later in the course, then you can actually switch the track to being tick based and it will conform to your tempo map. Okay. So now that you know all about creating tracks, it's good to get a little organized. When you create new tracks in Pro Tools, the software will assign names to them, like Audio 1, Audio 2, and so on. They're pretty bland names, but you can rename them. So to rename a track, you just double-click on the track nameplate, either in the Edit or Mix window, and a dialog will appear that allows you to type in the new name. So I'll just show you that really quickly. So I'm going to create these audio tracks just for fun. But let's say I want to rename this Audio 2 track. I'm just going to double click on it and that opens up this dialog. So another way you can open up that dialog is you can right click on the track nameplate and then select rename to open up the same exact dialog box. So I'll show that really quickly. So I'm just going to hit cancel. I'm going to right click on that nameplate here and select rename. And then also I mentioned this, but I'll just show you really quickly. So this is the edit window, right? This is the mix window. You can do the same thing in the mix window. So right click and rename or double click. Okay. So in this dialog box, you can also add comments for each track and you can move between the tracks using the previous and next buttons. The short keys to access these previous and next buttons are to hold Command or Control on Windows and press the left or right arrow keys. So I'll just show you guys that really quickly. So I'm going to hold Command and I'm going to hit left. It'll go to the previous track. See how it just keeps going? And you can notice which track I'm on based on the name right here, name of the track. Or I can hit right to go to the next track. Okay. There's also a comments area in this dialog box, right, that you can then display in the mix and the edit windows. So in the mix window, comments are displayed at the bottom of each channel strip. And in the edit window, they're displayed towards the left of the track by the head of the track. So I can just kind of show you guys that really quickly. I'm going to write a comment in here, my comment, so you can see it populate. So right here, you can see it. I'm in the mix window and it's at the bottom right here. And of course, we went over this before, but you can toggle comments and a bunch of other view options in and out using this drop or pop-up menu, I guess it is technically. So comments. And then if we switch over to the edit window, right now I don't have comments displayed, but I can click on this drop-down menu and select comments right here. And then I can see my comments and I can find my comments and edit them very easily. Okay, so as you can see, I usually just leave the comments displayed in the mix window and not in the edit window, but it's just your preference what you want to do. Okay, so let's say you're sick of a track and you want to delete it. You can delete a track by right-clicking on a track nameplate and selecting delete. If there's data on the tracks, then Pro Tools will ask you to confirm the delete. So I'm just going to pick a track here. I'm going to do an empty one. I'm going to right click. I'm going to hit delete. And it just deletes that one because there's no data on it. But let's say if I delete this one, it'll ask me if I'm sure. So it says, do you still want to delete? And I go, yeah, delete. Okay. So it's important to know that once you hit delete, your track is permanently removed from the session. You can't Command Z to undo it. So make sure you want it gone for good before you hit delete. And just so you know, another way to delete a track is to click on the track nameplate to highlight the track and then go to the track menu and select delete. So I can just show you that really quickly. So I highlighted this track. I'm going to the track menu up top. And then I'm just going to select delete right here. And it'll delete it that way as well. So when selecting a track to delete or copy or perform any other functions on, you can select multiple tracks at once. So you just have to hold Shift and click, or hold Command or Control in Windows and click on the nameplates to select multiple tracks. Just like with most programs within the Mac operating system, when you hold Shift and click, it will highlight the entire range of tracks between the first track you clicked and the second track you clicked. So I can just show you guys that really quickly. So I'm just going to click this first track, and then I'm going to hold Shift, and then I'm going to click way up here, and it'll highlight that entire range. Okay. However, when you hold Command and click, it will only select the tracks that you specifically click on, skipping any tracks that might exist between the two. So I can just show you guys that really quickly as well. So I'm going to click on this track, and then I'm going to hold Command. I'm going to click on a couple other tracks all the way down here. And if you notice, it doesn't hit the range. It just highlights the tracks that I actually clicked on. Okay. So once you have your tracks, you can look into putting some audio on those tracks. So there are two main ways to add audio to a track in Pro Tools. You can either import existing audio, or you can record audio to your tracks. But regardless of the way you add the audio to the tracks, once the audio is brought into the session, Pro Tools will add the audio to the clip list, which, if you remember from one of our previous episodes, is located to the right of the edit window. So I'll just show you that really quickly. Here's my clip list right here, and it lists all my audio clips. Okay. We'll go more into how to record and import audio to a track later because it's a bit complex and we should cover a few other things first. But just know for now that the audio will be displayed on the clip list, and you can either record or import audio into Pro Tools. So let's look into this edit window and learn a bit about the cursors that we use to maneuver about the timeline. So you might not have noticed yet because they're usually linked, but you actually have two different types of cursors in the edit window. There's the playback cursor and the edit cursor. You'll usually see them linked because they're linked by default, but you can unlink them. I don't really recommend unlinking them unless you have a specific reason to do so, but if you unlink them, you can edit one area of your session while listening back to a different area of your session. So this means that you can play back and listen to a larger section of a piece while highlighting, working with, and otherwise editing a smaller region within what you're listening to. So let's say that's what you want to do. All you have to do is go to your options menu and then deselect link timeline and edit selection. So I'm just going to show you that really quickly. So we're going to this option menu, and I'm going to deselect link timeline and edit selection. And you can tell that it was selected because that check mark was next to it, right? Now, I recommend leaving that option with the check mark next to it because then the two cursors are linked. And if transport is stopped and you're looking at your session, then the playback and edit cursor will always overlap each other. If that option doesn't have the check mark next to it, then the two cursors are not linked anymore. So, how do you know which cursor is which? Well, the playback cursor is a solid line that moves along your session during playback. It doesn't blink, and it displays exactly where your playback point is located. If I hit play in my session, you can see it move along, displaying that exact playback point. So I'll just show you guys that really quickly. I'm going to pass the audio so we can see this without the audio interrupting me. Oh, I'm sorry. I had to do it right here. So there's that playback cursor right here, this solid line, right, guys? All right. So the location of the playback cursor is also what is displayed in those main and sub time counters that we talked about in a previous episode. Now, the edit cursor is a blinking line that shows up when you're using the selector tool. So I can show you that really quickly. So I'm in my multi-tool. I'm going to make sure I'm in that selector tool, and then I click, and you can see this cursor. It's a little blinking line. So that's which one it is. So this cursor is a starting point for any editing tasks that you might do. Once you use the selector tool to highlight an area of a clip or clips with the edit cursor, that selection is the area upon which Pro Tools will perform any editing tasks that you then select. Now, you'll notice that if I deselect the link timeline and edit selection option, then click with the selector tool, my edit cursor will move about, but the little blue flags up in the ruler section of my timeline won't move at all. So I'll just show you that really quickly. So I have it deselected already. And here are these little blue flags, right? And I'm clicking about here, and they don't move with my edit cursor. So that's because these little blue flags indicate where the playback cursor will appear during playback. And the playback cursor is no longer linked to the edit cursor, right? So if I hit play, you'll also see that the playback starts where the playback cursor is located, and it ignores where the edit cursor is located, right? So my edit cursor is way over here, but if I hit spacebar to play, it starts playback way back here. Now, if I link the timeline and edit selection again and start moving the edit cursor around with my selector tool, then you'll see those flags will follow the edit cursor again. So I'll just show you that really quickly. So I'm just going to go Options, Link Timeline and Edit Selection. That's now checked. So now you see these flags have moved, indicating the playback cursor has moved with it. And now everything follows where my edit cursor is located. So if I click over here and I hit play, you can see that it'll start playback from the same location. Okay. This is because the playback cursor and the edit cursor are once again linked, right? So to set a playback point, you can click within any of the rulers in the timeline display area with any of the edit tools enabled. This also works whether or not the timeline and edit selections are linked. So I'm just going to kind of show you that if I'm clicking on any of these rulers, it's going to move that playback cursor point. And that'll work if this is unlinked as well. So if you notice my edit cursor is staying where it is, but these little flags that indicate where the playback cursor is are moving about when I click. So that's the most surefire way of setting a playback point, because regardless of whether they're linked, that's going to work for you. But if the timeline and edit selections are linked, you can also set the playback point by enabling the selector edit tool and clicking on a point on a track. And we did that a minute ago, so I'm not going to show you that again. But since the timeline selection is linked to this edit selection, it will automatically set your playback point to the location that you chose. So once you've set a playback point, you can use the spacebar to start and stop playback. So I've showed you that already, but I'll just show you it again. So I'm just going to hit spacebar, and it's going to start playing from that location. Okay. Now, there are some options that allow the playback cursor to go out of view on your screen. So it's good to be able to spot where it is and where your subsequent playback point is, right? So Pro Tools has a built-in playback cursor locator that can help you find that playback cursor if it travels off your screen. Excuse me. So if that has happened and the playback cursor has gone off screen, your playback cursor locator appears in your main time-based ruler. If you remember, the main time-based ruler is whichever ruler is highlighted. So it's also the ruler that has the same units of measurement as the main time counter. Anyway, This playback cursor locator will appear to the far left or right of the main time-based ruler, depending on the direction in which the playback cursor is located. So I can disable scrolling really quickly by going to Options, Edit Window Scrolling, and then selecting No Scrolling to let the cursor pass out of my screen's view. So I'm just going to do that really quickly. So I'm just going to go to Options. And I'm just going to, oh my gosh. Excuse me. Go to Edit Window Scrolling. And then I'm going to select, so I already have No Scrolling selected here. Okay. So that's perfect. So if I just leave it playing off the screen, I can see a small blue arrow that points to the right, indicating that my playback cursor is to the right. So I'll just show you guys that really quickly. So I'm going to click here right by the screen and make sure my playback cursor is up there, right? Because they're not linked right now. I'm just going to hit play with my spacebar. And you'll notice when it goes off the screen that we're going to have that indicator will pop up, and it'll pop up right here. So there it is, a little blue arrow. And it's pointing to the right to tell you which direction it is in. So similarly, I can set the playback cursor location in one part of my session and then zoom in elsewhere, and I will see the same small arrow pop up telling me which way the playback cursor went. So I'll just show you that really quickly. So I'm just going to leave the playback cursor. Let's see, I'll just leave it right there. And then I'm going to zoom in. And now you can see that little arrow indicates to you which way that playback cursor is located. Okay. Excuse me. So this small arrow is called the playback cursor locator, and it will display as a small red arrow if any tracks are record enabled. To make the edit window's waveform display area jump to the exact location of this playback cursor, you can also just click on the playback cursor locator and you'll see your view jumps so that it's now centered around the playback cursor. So I'll just do that really quickly. So here's that locator again, right? I just double clicked on it and now the playback cursor is right in the middle of my screen. Okay, but now you might be wondering why I had to make sure that no scrolling option was checked a minute ago. So let's discuss your scrolling options a bit. Scrolling options control how your edit window material is displayed during playback and recording. So the two most common scrolling options are called no scrolling and page scrolling. So no scrolling is what we made sure was on earlier. If you remember, you can access the option by going to Options and then selecting Edit Window Scrolling and then No Scrolling. When No Scrolling is checkmarked, Pro Tools won't control the edit window to keep up with the playback cursor during playback and recording. When No Scrolling is not checkmarked or enabled, right, another option will be checkmarked. And then Pro Tools is not prevented from scrolling to keep the cursor within view. So if I let the playback cursor drift off the screen when no scrolling is check marked, then the window doesn't reposition at all when I pause playback or during playback. However, if I select page instead of no scrolling, then try to move about in the edit window during playback, you will see that Pro Tools is now able to reposition the edit window based on the playback cursor location. So I'll just show you that really quickly. So I'm going to go to Options, Edit Window Scrolling. I'm going to select Page, and then I'm going to put my playback cursor all the way over here again so we can see it quickly. Oh, but you know what? We should do it where there's some audio so we can see this shift. So I'm just going to zoom in a bit so we can see this effect happen quickly. And so I'm starting the playback cursor right here. I'm going to hit play and you'll see it scroll. So this will go out of view. All right. So there's the scroll, right? Okay. So page scrolling causes the edit window to scroll by one page or screen at a time while the playback cursor is moving. So just like no scrolling, you can enable this option by going to Options and then selecting Edit Window Scrolling and then selecting Page, right? When the page scrolling option is checkmarked or enabled, the playback cursor will move across your screen during playback or recording. But when it hits the edge of the screen, all your window contents will scroll by one screen value. And we will see the cursor continue along playback from the left side of the screen, like we just saw. So we can just watch the playback cursor travel past the far right of our screen and see that effect in page scrolling mode, right? But on a side note, if you notice that page scrolling isn't quite working properly, you should probably try zooming out a bit, because if you're too zoomed in, it can work a little funky. It won't work quite right. Okay. So let's cover some details of opening, finding, and saving out sessions before moving on to recording and importing audio. I think we already covered the fact that you can access options for opening, finding, and saving sessions within the file menu of your session. You can quickly save a session using the save or save as commands. I'm just going to kind of show you that those are there really quickly. So file, you see these save and save as commands. We already showed them, but I just wanted to make sure you guys saw that. So when you do this, Pro Tools only saves the details of the session file, which is the one with the PTX extension, right? And this is because your audio and other files are written straight to your hard drive disk, so you don't need to save those. So this makes it fast and easy to save your session. So I recommend you stop to save your work often. But what's the difference between save and save as functions? Well, the save command saves any changes that have been made since your last save. And it replaces the old version of your session with this newer version. It can't be undone, and you can save by going to File and then selecting Save, or by holding Command and hitting the S key on your keyboard. So I'll just show you the Command S. So I'm holding Command, I'm hitting S, and it saved it for me. So the Save As command is great if you want to save a copy of a session in a different location on your computer or under a different name. So it's great for saving at various stages in your project, because when you save as a session under a new name, Pro Tools will technically close your session under the old name and then open up the copy with the new name. So you'll continue to work in the version of the session that you saved under that new name. So I like to work this way because if I do a save as at key points in my workflow, I can easily go backwards and retrace my steps if I feel that I might want to undo a significant amount of what I've done. So, for example, if I do a save as immediately before mixing, then later while I'm mixing, I can easily open my save from before any mixing to compare my raw session to my mix session and see how I'm doing. So, to make a save as, just go to the file menu and then select save as. Then you just follow the prompts to rename or move your session and click the save button. So I can show you that really quickly. So save as. So here I am. It's the test folder for my test session. So I'm going to name it test 2. I'm going to leave it within the folder. I'm going to hit save. And if you notice up here, I'm now using test 2 instead of test. So Pro Tools will keep your newly named session open, and you can just continue working from there. It's important to keep in mind that the save and save as commands only save or create the .ptx files. So if you use save as to create a copy of your session, it won't make duplicates of your audio files folder or anything else. There's another command under the file menu called save copy that will duplicate all your files for you like that, but we will go into that command later. So we already mentioned the existence of the open session and open recent commands under the file menu, right? I can show you those really quickly. So file, and then we have these open options, right? They're right up top. Basically, use open recent if you want to open a recently opened session, and use open session if you know where your session file is and would like to open it. However, If you haven't opened the session recently and you're not entirely sure of where your session is on the computer, you can actually find it using the Workspace browser. So the Workspace browser is great for finding, opening, and managing Pro Tools sessions and media that's used in Pro Tools. So it has improved systems for searching media files, finding file information, and auditioning audio that's your standard OS search doesn't have. So you can use the Workspace browser to search for specific file types. To open the Workspace browser, just go to your window menu and then select New Workspace. So I'll show you that really quickly. I'm just going to go all the way over here to my window menu. And then I'm going to find that New Workspace option right here. And then I'm going to click it. And it opens up the workspace for you. So you'll then see that window pop up. And to run a search, you'll probably want to click the Advanced Search button next. So it's the hamburger button that's to the right of the search button. So that's this button right here with 3 lines. Someone called it a hamburger button, so I'm going with it. So I'm going to click that, and it opens up these further options for me. So you can tell that the advanced search is active because the button will highlight blue, and it opens up more settings and options for running your search. Now, the left-hand column where it says locations is called the location pane, right? So I can kind of show you that really quickly. It's this section right here. You can select a folder or volume to search in within the location pane just by clicking on the folder. To find the volume you want to search, you can click on the arrows to the left of a volume or folder to expand or collapse it. So I can kind of show you that really quickly, how it expands. So I'm just going to do that with my test folder. I'm going to select that. And there you go. You can see how it opens up the different options. So in here, I just have the session audio files right now, So then you have a bunch of search options that you can choose. So in the advanced search options that popped up when you clicked the advanced search button, you can start selecting parameters. So where it says any text column, you can click to open up a drop-down menu with a whole bunch of options. So I'll just show you that drop-down. So right here, any text column, you have a whole bunch of options. So I'm going to choose kind here to run a search for a certain kind of file, but you can choose any of the options here. So I'm just going to choose kind. So you could choose things like bit depth or sample rate to run a search for files with a specific bit depth or sample rate, or you can run a search for files of a specific length or date modified date. There are so many options here, but we will go into those in more detail later. Anyway, if I then select session file where it says any, the Workspace browser will show me all the session files within the location that I'm searching. So I'm just going to show you that really quickly. So here it says any. I'm just going to select session file. So from here, I can actually open any session file that I find in the Workspace browser directly from the Workspace browser. So this is yet another way we can open a session besides using our file menu, open session options, or double clicking on the session file straight from your computer's Finder or Explorer window, right? But anyway, to open a session from the Workspace browser, you just double click on the session file. So I'll show you that really quickly. So I'm just going to open the one that I already have open, but you'll see it closes it out and reopens it. So if you already have a session open, Pro Tools will then ask you if you want to save your session, unless it's already been saved, which mine had been, before closing it out and then opening the desired session that you clicked, right? So it does this because Pro Tools can only have one session open at a time. Okay. So now that we've covered tracks, session layout, and some navigation basics, let's talk about prepping for recording. Not all sessions involve recording, but recording audio to your tracks is often the first step in a project. Before you start recording, though, it's important to make sure you have enough disk space on your computer to record your audio. So nowadays, this isn't as much of an issue, but it's good to know how to calculate how much space your audio files will take. Not all audio takes the same amount of space on your hard drive. Now, if you remember, we already discussed sample rate and bit depth in a previous episode, and those are exactly what we will use to determine how much space those audio files will take. Now, if you're working in a mono track with a sample rate of 44.1 kilohertz with a 16-bit bit depth, then each minute of audio will take up about 5 megabytes, which is abbreviated capital M, capital B, of disk space. So if you change that to a 24-bit bit depth, then it'll take approximately 7.5 megabytes per minute of audio. If you change it again to 32-bit floating point bit depth, then your audio will take up to 10 megabytes per minute of audio. Similarly, if you increase the sampling rate, then the audio will take more disk space on your computer. So logically, if you double the 44.1 kilohertz sampling rate to 88.2 kilohertz, you'll find that your audio takes up twice the space because it has to store twice the number of data points or samples, right, for each minute of audio. So if you then start recording in stereo instead of mono, it will also double the storage space required for your audio. Now, some of the storage space that an audio file requires is due to the clip metadata that Pro Tools requires for its audio files, and that takes up about 0.3 megabytes per minute. But anyway, the important thing to know here is that you can calculate file size if you know that your bits per second are equal to sample rate times bit depth. So if you multiply that formula by 60, because we have 60 seconds in a minute, then you get sample rate times bit depth times 60 equals bits per minute, right? So since 8 bits make a byte, and 1,024 bytes make a kilobyte, which is abbreviated capital K, capital B, and 1,024 kilobytes make a megabyte, we can determine how many bits make a megabyte. So we multiply 8 bits per byte by 1,024 bytes per kilobyte by 1,024 kilobytes per megabyte to get 8,388,608 bits per megabyte. If we then insert that into our equation, so that sample rate times bit depth times 60 seconds per minute, right, divided by that 8,388,608 bits per megabyte, that will give us megabytes per minute. We can also then reduce that down further to get sample rate times bit depth divided by 139,810. And that equals megabytes per minute, right? So once we have this formula, we can just plug in the sample rate and bit depth of any mono audio file to determine how many megabytes per minute it will consume. With that said, you'll probably rarely, if at all, have to calculate that. But I believe it's important for an engineer to have a good technical foundation of knowledge. So let's go back to Pro Tools. There's a window in Pro Tools that's called your disk usage window. You can use it to check and estimate how much recording time you have available and how much disk space is left on your system. So to open the window, just go to the window menu and select disk usage. So I'm just going to show you that really quickly. Window, and I'm just going to find disk usage all the way down here, and then I'm going to click on it, and it pops up that window. It's tiny for me because I just have the one hard drive. So this window shows you how many continuous track minutes are available for each of your mounted hard drives, depending on the sample rate and bit depth of your session. I only have one hard drive here, so you only see one row, but if I had more, then there would be more rows of information here. So if you're following along in the process, by now you should have created a session, made some tracks, and hopefully you've made an audio track in order to record onto, and made sure that you have enough space on your computer to record a bit. In order to prep for recording, the next thing you'll want to do is possibly create a click track and prep your hardware and software for recording. So let's cover how to make that click track, and then we will move on to the steps of prepping your hardware and software, which will include checking the hardware connections, setting the track input path and input level, and record enabling the audio track that you want to record to. All right, so you don't need to create a click track, but people find them useful as a tempo reference for musicians. So a click track is basically a track that has a metronome plugin on it, and its purpose is to play a generated metronome sound to the beat of the music. If you're working with bars and beats, it's a great tool to ensure that the recorded performance will match your bar and beat locations designated within your session. Excuse me. So this can make it a lot easier while editing and mixing later on. To create your click track, you can simply go to the track menu and then select Create Click Track. So I'll just show you guys that really quickly. So I'm just going to go to the track menu. Oh, you know what? I'm going to close out this disk usage window first. So track menu, and I'm just going to go all the way to the bottom here where it says Create Click Track, and I'm going to click on that. If you notice, it creates this little click track right down here. So what this does is it creates a new auxiliary input track and places the Click 2 plugin on that aux track. So you can see the Click 2 plugin right here. If I switch to the mix window, you can see it up here. So the Click 2 is a mono plugin that simply creates that metronome sound for you. And there are several sound options that you can select for that metronome sound. The Click 2 uses your Pro Tools tempo map, receiving its instructions from Pro Tools, which allows it to follow any meter or tempo changes that you program into your tempo map. And just in case it's not already enabled, once you create your click track, you can go to your options menu and select click to enable the click. So I'm just going to make sure mine's on right now. So options, and I have click checked. So I'm all good. Okay. You can also enable that the click track using that metronome button in your transport window that we discussed earlier. So you'll notice, let me switch back to this. So it's this metronome button here. So I can enable it and disable it that way. So right now it's highlighted, so it's enabled, right? Okay. Now to open up the Click plugin to configure its settings, you will open it just like any other plugin. So you find your insert section, either your mix or edit windows. And depending on what you have displayed, you might find that only your mix windows currently has an insert section displayed. But as we covered in an earlier episode, and actually earlier in this episode, you can use those drop-down menus in either the mix or the edit windows to display and insert sections. The insert sections, I'm sorry. So I have them both displayed, but you could toggle them on and off right here. Okay. So once you find that insert section, you should see the nameplate for that Click 2 plugin. So you just click on that nameplate to open up the plugin. So I'm just going to click on that, and it opens it right up. Now you'll notice that there are two sets of controls in the bottom of this plugin window. So one is labeled Click 1 and the other is labeled Click 2. So the Click 1 controls affect the accented beat, which is beat 1 for each bar of music. And the Click 2 controls affect the unaccented beats, which are the rest of the beats in each bar of music. You can easily change which type of sound or instrument you're hearing for the accented and unaccented beats individually. You just click on those black nameplate looking things to the right of each of the clicks volume fader, and then you select a new sound. So I can show you that really quickly. So it's this nameplate thing for each one. So right now I'm on the accented beat. So I can just go and pick whatever I want. So I can pick a cowbell, whatever. Okay. So you can also do things like changing how frequent the click sounds off using those music note buttons. And you can change the volume of the accented and unaccented beats. I like to make the accented beat louder than the unaccented beat this way. And once you have your click how you want it, you just click on that little X button on the top of the plugin to close out its display window. So I'm just going to show you that really quickly, but it's just like any other plugin. You just close it out and it stays right there on the insert panel. So you can then further customize your click options by opening that click count off window that we covered in a previous episode. I won't go into that too much since we already covered it, but if you remember, you can open it a few different ways, which includes going to your setup window and then selecting click count off. So I'm just going to open that up really quickly so you can see it. But it's under setup, and I'm just going to find click count off, and I'm going to open that up. So it's good to know that your note, velocity, duration, and output options in this window will affect the MIDI instrument-based clicks. So these variables won't affect the Click 2 plugin. So that's all we have for today, but I hope you got some useful information out of today's episode. Next time, we will cover the basics of recording audio to your tracks and how to check to make sure your hardware and software is ready for recording. We will cover some naming conventions that you should know and organizational techniques that's important if you're tracking a bunch of audio into your session. And then we will go into working with audio clips by renaming them, deleting versus removing them, moving them around, and so on. We might even get into the details of importing audio after that. So thanks for watching Pro Tools Authority, and I hope to see you guys next time.